Hi, my name is Seth Fentress, otherwise known as Blender Sensei, and I'm the creator of ZeroBrush, Drag and Drop Environments, and the Alchemy Material Library add-ons for Blender. Today I want to talk to you about a free Blender training series called the Blender Crash Course. So if you'll just head over to your browser and go to blendersensei.com, if you click on the store page here, you will see a lot of sweet Blender assets for sale, but if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see a link to the crash course here. And so to check it out, you can just click Start Crash Course. So this training series aims to teach you the basics of 3D modeling, animation, materials, lighting, sculpting, painting, rigging, and many more disciplines required to make animated films and commercial quality video game assets. But really more than that, just to kind of baptize you into the world of Blender and give you a huge jump start on bringing the crazy awesome things that exist in your brain out into reality. So that's sort of the goal here. So this course is totally free. However, it does require you to have an account on the site, but good news, that is also free. So you'll notice here where it says requires login next to start segment. If we click on start segment now without being logged in, we'll get this little message saying, hey, you need to be logged in or create an account. So if you need to create an account, you can click sign up at the top here. And the sign up process is super simple. Just pick a username, enter an email that you want to use, and click register. So I've got sort of a fake user I use to do testing on the site, which I have named Boba Fett, if I could spell. So I'll go ahead and log in as my Boba Fett user. And once you do that, you'll see your account up at the top of the page and everything. And actually, a quick way to get to your progress in the crash course is to just click on your account page. And here you can click on online courses. Currently, the only online course available on the site is the main Blender Crash Course, but I plan to have more courses in the future. So you can also check out your quiz results from this page, which, yes, there are quizzes available if you want to test your knowledge after watching a bunch of training videos. So if I click on the crash course here, now that we're logged in, we no longer see the requires login bit there. And so we could click Start Segment. And this takes us to the first video segment of the series. So you'll notice this little item here that says tutorial files. So if that video contains any tutorial files you need to download, they're available for you to download right directly under the video. So of course, the first video in the series, you're going to be downloading and installing Blender in Sensei Format. So here is a link to download Sensei Format, and here is a link to go to the official download page to get Blender, which I always recommend using the official Blender download page, blender.org/download, to get the most stable recent release of Blender. But if we scroll down to the end of this first segment here, you'll notice that there is a link to take a quiz for that segment. So if we click this, you'll see a pretty short quiz on each segment. It's basically just to sort of make sure that the key points get driven home, and then you can submit your answers, which will then be graded and show you a score. You can retake these tests as many times as you want if you're not happy with the score you made, whatever. It's just basically a learning tool for you. And then also at the bottom of each segment is a link to a forum that is dedicated specifically for the crash course. So if you want to submit any work that you did, or you need help, or you just want to show something cool you made to somebody else, it's sort of a feedback chamber for you there. Apart from being totally free and super awesome, what makes this Blender training series different from others you might find online? The answer is Sensei Format. Sensei Format is a super simple to install add-on for Blender, which overhauls Blender's user interface. It gives it sort of a more Adobe-esque kind of sheen and simplicity. So if you're familiar with programs like Photoshop or Adobe After Effects, it brings that kind of aesthetic to Blender, in addition to just making your life a lot better. For a quick example, let's try completing the same task, one in Blender without Sensei Format installed, and and the other with Sensei Format installed. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and go ahead and open up Blender, and this is just a generic default install Blender, no add-ons, no changes to settings or anything like that. It's right out of the box. Okay, so we've got this cube here and we've got our camera over here in this default Blender scene. So say we wanted this camera to be able to follow this cube. How would we do that in Blender default? Well, first we would need to right click and select this camera. Next, we would need to click this button over here in the properties panel. And we would need to add a constraint, this track 2 constraint here. So next, if we click on the cube, after we've added the constraint, if we press G to grab to move the cube, notice the camera is not following our cube, so that's no good. So we would need to click back on the camera and select a target. So to do that, I can click here and select the cube. That is the object I want to track. Or we can use this sweet little eyedropper tool, click on it and just select the object we want. And now the camera is tracking the cube, only it seems to be facing downwards away from the cube, which is not ideal. So really, we need to be able to see what the camera is seeing to make sure this is working. Even though if I move the cube, we can see the camera is moving. We really don't have any way of telling if it's working right, which it doesn't look like it is. So to do that, we're going to split this screen by selecting these little diagonal lines in the top, drag this over, and then what we want to do is press 0 on the numpad on the keyboard. If you even have a numpad on your keyboard, if you're not on a laptop, which if that was the case, we'd have to change some more settings, which we're not going to do. But anyway, so now if we press G to grab this cube, we can see that no, indeed the camera is not following the cube. So we'll need to click back on the camera and adjust these settings until it's doing what it's supposed to, which, if I recall, and it's been a long time since I've had to do this manually, I think it's -Z. Well, that's not quite it. And Y, I think. There we go. Okay, finally the camera is following the cube. Okay, so big deal. That took like 7 or 8 steps. It was a little annoying, but not hard to ultimately get done. But the problem is, what happens when 2 weeks later you've been studying some other discipline in Blender, like sculpting, and you've started a scene, and you need to have your camera quickly track something, and you sort of remember how to do it, but you're kind of fumbling through it, and you have to go back and revisit documentation or the original tutorial you watched to learn how to do it. And it ends up killing 15 or 20 more minutes in a project that it never should have. And that is the purpose of Sensei Format. Only instead of handling one little issue like this, it handles hundreds and combines them together contextually and fluidly to create an amazing user experience. In comparison, let's go ahead and download and install Sensei Format. And I'm once again going to run through this real quickly, because we cover in depth how to do all this for all operating systems and everything in the next video. So if you're unable to install, don't worry, we're going to do this in depth in a minute. But the basic process of it is you want to head over to blendersensei.com, which we already are here. And if you're taking the crash course video by video, you can just download it straight from here, or you can also download it from the official store page right here. And so we could click download. All right, so that has now downloaded to my desktop, as you can see there. So from in Blender, I want to go to File, User Preferences, and I'll expand this window here. Click Add-ons. And then down at the bottom, Install from File. I'll click Desktop. And so this quickly gets me to my desktop where I have that file. And click Sensei Format.zip. Now you want to make sure that when you go to install this, it remains zipped. So if you're using a browser like Safari or something, which automatically unzips things, you may need to download it with something else or re-zip it up with a free zip program like 7-zip or something. But most browsers don't unzip it, so you'll be good to go. Just click on the senseiformat.zip and install from file. And now it's brought the add-on into Blender, so all we have to do is check mark it here. Then we'll get this pop-up message explaining to us some stuff. The most important thing that you need to read about in this message is that if you've been using Blender for a while and you had like other add-ons installed and stuff, you'll have to reactivate those add-ons while using Sensei Format the first time you install. This is just the case because Sensei Format uses its own custom settings and stuff like that. So like if you had, I don't know, Make Human or some other thing installed before you installed Sensei Format, once you install Sensei Format, you'll have to come back into the add-ons, recheck them, no big deal, and then save your user settings. That's the last time you'll ever have to do that. You'll be able to update Sensei Format and Blender and automatically carry over all your settings all at once. However, if you are new to Blender and you have no idea what I'm talking about just now, don't worry about it. Just click OK and you should be good to go. The other thing this mentions is that after activating, it has to shut Blender down. So when we click OK, it'll shut Blender down. But when we go to open it back up, Sensei Format is now installed. So among a bunch of other things, you'll notice up here in the file menu a new item called Sensei Format. And this gives you access to the Sensei Format manual and hotkeys, which I recommend you download both of these right off the bat because they're very useful and can help you get some stuff figured out. And another thing I should note is that if you decide, you know what, I'm not really into this after a couple of days of using or something, you can always deactivate Sensei Format, and this will return your original settings to exactly however they were, so your custom themes or workspaces or whatever. So if you wanted to deactivate it, you just click deactivate and then click OK. It'll shut Blender down, you open it back up, and you're back to your original Blender settings. And once again, if you decide, you know what, I want to go back to Sensei, you can come here and under Sensei Format, click Activate Sensei again. Or if you want the add-on just like totally gone forever, like put it in a cannon and fire it into the sun, you can come here and click Full Uninstall, and that will remove the icon from your file bar and all that stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and activate Sensei again, click OK, and open Blender back up here. Okay, so back to the task at hand. How do we get the camera to follow the cube now that we have Sensei Format installed in Blender? Well, if you'll notice down here at the bottom right of the default screen, this area in Sensei Format we call the director's chair. And what it is the view from your scene's camera along with a really awesome compact little menu here, which helps you do a lot of stuff you need to do constantly in Blender. To get the camera to follow this cube, all we do is with the cube selected, come down here where it says camera and click track selected. Now, if we press G to grab this cube, you can see the camera is both following it in the 3D view there, as well as in the actual camera view. And that's it. So if you wanted it to stop, you just come here and click stop tracking. And now the camera won't move, as you can see, as I move the cube in front of it. Or if you wanted it to track something else, we could double right click and say add a monkey here. With that monkey selected, come here and click track selected. Now the camera's following the monkey. Okay, so you may have missed it, but two really big things happened just now. One, you learned how to get your camera to track objects in Blender. And two, in the future, when you've learned a bunch of other stuff and you randomly realize you need to have the camera be able to track something, you're not going to forget how to come down here and under camera, click track selected. So that is now a discipline that has been permanently added to your arsenal of Blender abilities. In a minute, I'm going to give a longer demonstration of some really awesome things that Sensei Format can help you do right out of the box. But I want to take a second to answer some common questions people have about Sensei Format. One of the main ones is, okay, so you've got this new way of doing something, but what if I learned it the old way? Can I still do it that way? Of course you can. I mean, this is just Blender. It's Blender enhanced, but that doesn't mean that all the other stuff you could do without Sensei Format, you can't do all of a sudden. So for instance, I could press stop tracking. And if I wanted to set this all up manually, I could click on the camera here, click on the constraints, which it already had a track 2 constraint added because we used the track selected button here, but I could delete that, come here, click track to and do basically the same process we did a few minutes ago without Sensei Format installed. I think this was set to -Z and Y here. And okay, so now the monkey's head is being tracked. So none of the tools you're used to if you are a previous Blender user or you plan on, following other tutorials other than Blender Sensei tutorials, which I totally suggest because there's an amazing wealth of content from incredible creators online. Sensei Format's not going to stop you from following someone else's tools. So if I press T to bring up my tool shelf and property shelf, we do have some sweet additions, which I'm going to go over in a minute about how awesome they are. But we still have the original Blender toolset and menus and bars and everything. So nothing from Blender goes away. It's just sort of tucked up, hidden, and made more contextual and easy to use. Another question I get a lot is, well, can I use other add-ons if I have Sensei Format or ZeroBrush or other stuff installed? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can. It's no big deal. Just go to File, User Preferences, expand this window, and under Add-ons, you can activate any of these other add-ons that Blender comes pre-installed with, or third-party add-ons such as Master Xeon's Amazing Hard Ops, or something from another Blender store. It all works. Sensei Format isn't here to slow you down. It's basically a fancy code butler to make your life way better and to help speed up the process of projects. So, in the example we just gave, like you need the camera to track something, but you haven't, messed with that in like 4 months. So you have to go look up a tutorial how to do it because you sort of forgot how to do it. It's to remove roadblocks and to make your life better. And to prove that even further, I'm going to go ahead and X this out here. But to prove that even further, I want to give a demonstration over the next few minutes of some of my favorite features of Sensei Format. This in no way is a complete list of all the different things that you can do with Sensei Format installed. That's why the Blender crash course exists. That's why I recommend you take the crash course. However, if you're still on the fence about trying it out, hopefully I can convince you to at least give it a try with this next couple of demonstrations. And also remember, if you're new to Blender, that these demonstrations coming up here in a second aren't really a tutorial, so don't worry about being able to repeat everything I'm doing exactly. That's the whole point of the crash course, so you can come to understand everything more fully and concatenate all these ideas and be able to use all these tools all at once and everything. But this is just to basically like an E3 showing, like to get you hyped on it so you'll want to take the course and learn how to do it all. Okay, so I'm going to go to File, New, and press Reload Startup File. So one of my favorite things about Sensei Format is that it comes with ZeroBrush Lite. So if I press T, which in Sensei Format brings up your tool shelf and property shelf, it will always open whatever extra menus exist in an editor type. So I could press S to scale this cube up, maybe G to grab, middle mouse to constrain it. And so if I wanted to turn this cube into a head or something, I could press my sculpt button, and this takes us to sculpt mode, and I could press make sculptable, which we'll get into what all these different options are in the future. Once again, this is just a quick demo here. So I'm going to press more under detail to increase this to about 7 levels, and then press 1 to go into front view. Then I can press space to bring up my brush selection menu for whatever kind of painting or sculpting I'm in. And I'll select this inflate deflate brush. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my X mirror, which means whatever I sculpt on one side will happen on the other side. Then I'm going to press Shift X to increase the strength of this brush and X to increase the size. And if I hold Shift while I sculpt, then this will do the opposite operation of whatever brush I have selected. So this is a inflate deflate brush. So if I hold Shift and do this, it will deflate. And then so if I just do a regular sculpt with my mouse or a Wacom tablet or whatever around the tops, then I can inflate, and so inflate those eyebrows. And then I could inflate a nose, and then I could press space and select my grab brush, X to increase its size, maybe pull out some kind of chin or something, and then back to the inflate deflate brush, and give some kind of little mouth here. while holding shift, and then just do regular to inflate those lips. And we've got some kind of weird little guy going on here. Hold control to smooth that out, maybe shift to deflate some nostrils there. And so you get the basic idea. So if I wanted to paint this thing we just made, all you do is come up here and click the texture paint button, and that's it. No setup, no special rules. You just press it and you can immediately paint whatever you had selected. So if I were to start painting now, I can paint all over this dude. So like we turned on X mirror for the sculpting, you could turn it on for texture painting so that whatever I paint on one side happens on the other. So I could, I don't know, paint some like weird eyebrows on this dude, or give him some kind of crazy mustache. I don't know, whatever. Okay, so notice right now that we are in Blender render mode. If we want to switch to cycles, we can do this instantly. All you have to do is press cycles, and guess what? You're painting in cycles now. So if I were to go ahead and turn on my quick lights for cycles, which what this does is it makes the sky go black basically and creates a special light rig to help give you really good test lighting environment if you don't have like a nice world environment setup or something. But as soon as you turn it off, as you'll notice down here in the director's chair camera area, it will send you back to whatever world you had set up. But with it on, if we press our render preview button now, you can see we're doing a test render here in cycles with this very bizarre man, which is pretty sweet. One thing I recommend that you try out is the optimized render feature. Right now, you notice if I rotate the screen a little bit, the render preview isn't going super fast. But if I turn my render preview off, or you can just press Shift Z to do that, and we come down here to the director's chair menus, under output options, you'll notice this optimize render button. And if your computer has a graphics card which uses CUDA, then this can drastically increase both your render previews and your actual renders of like a scene or an animation or whatever. And it also sets up a bunch of settings for rendering, like adjust light paths and things like that in cycles. So I would recommend clicking that and turning that on. And then if you go to do a render preview, you're now seeing much faster renders. However, if you turn that option on and there's an error or it causes Blender to crash or something, then it means your graphics card is not quite cut out for that option. But if you do find it's increasing speeds, which is great, then you'll want to keep that as a default setting. So let's go ahead and save this file here. I'm going to press File and Save As and click on my desktop and just call this some weird dude and click Save as Blend File. And what you'll want to do is turn Blender off, then come here, open Blender back up, and come down here and under output options, make sure optimize render is turned on, and then go to File, Save Startup File, and click OK. And so now that option, which will speed up your renders drastically, will be on all the time whenever you start Blender. Okay, so let's get back to our little weird thing we were doing. And if you're a familiar Blender user, you may have noticed something that just happened here. And that is, we created this image layer to paint on this guy. However, we did no manual saving. And when we saved the file and opened it back up, everything still works. And that sounds sort of like a minor feat, like you would expect any program to do that. However, Blender does not do that on its own. If you create a generated image like this and you don't manually save it and go into the image editor, then you'll a lot of times open your file back up and this will be pink or black or missing or something. But Sensei Format takes care of all that kind of stuff for you, so you can just, get straight to the artwork. Okay, so I'm going to press T to bring up my tool shelf and properties shelf again. So we could add more layers to this. We could add a bump layer. And the instant we add it, we're able to immediately begin painting on here. And we still have X mirror on, so what we paint on one side is, going on to the other side. A little funny looking. So let's go ahead and turn X mirror off. We could add an alpha mask layer, which basically what happens when you add that is now anywhere when you paint with that layer selected will be invisible. So if I, start painting through here, I can see straight through. this dude's head, which is pretty weird. So if we were to press our render preview button, we can see through dude's head, which there's no light source in there, so it is pretty dark. So we could add a light source. I could turn off render preview, click on my object mode button, press Shift A, and under mesh add a cube, press G to grab, S to scale, and so like maybe click texture paint on it and add a glow layer and just paint some glowy bits on there. And so now if we press render preview, we can see that cube inside of there, and it's also kind of like glowing up the inside of that head. You can see the light bouncing around in there. All right, I'll press Shift Z to turn off render preview. And once again, we're in cycles right now, but we could switch back to Blender render anytime. Just turn this button off here, and we're back in Blender render mode. Also, if you happen not to be painting, if you're not in texture paint mode, but say you are in objects mode here, you can also quickly switch between Blender render and cycles by pressing Q and this use cycles button to switch back and forth between those engines. And let's talk about some more sweet features. So another thing I like a lot about Sensei Format is the shape tools. If I click this, this will expand our shape tools here. And these are very similar to Illustrator's path tools if you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator. So I could basically, use this little menu to quickly add an object like this cylinder here. And if I wanted the cylinder to affect something close to it, all I have to do is just press one of these operations. So if I press cut out, that cylinder will now be cutting out of this cube. I can add thickness to this object I'm using by pressing this little button here. And if you're curious about what something does, you can always let your mouse hover over an option and you'll get a nice little message about what that thing does. And so as you can see, I can increase or decrease the thickness of this thing. If I wanted, I could press G to grab, pull this thing down. Another super awesome thing about these shape tools is that I can duplicate any one of these tools and its effects will carry over as I'm using it. So I could press D to duplicate this cylinder, and notice now its effect is also working on this cube. So I could press D again, duplicate those two, and real quickly I've got some really crazy shapes and stuff going on. I could add another cylinder, scale, middle mouse to constrain, S to scale down again. I could press cut out again and maybe increase this thickness here. I could add a sphere shape, and maybe this time instead of cutting out, I'll use intersect. And with this thickness option on, any new shape you add or tool you use will automatically have that on. But if you wanted to turn that off for your selection, you can always turn that off. But I'm going to keep it on because it looks super cool. And I'm going to adjust its thickness here. And you can just see this really super sweet shape starting to materialize here, like real quickly. So if we're done and we're ready to move on with this object, we just press apply. And we've got this super awesome looking weird sphere thing. So let's go ahead and rename this from cube because it doesn't really look like a cube anymore to awesome sphere, because that's what it is. Let's take a second to talk about these options under these mirror options here. And this is a dynamic menu, which means when different stuff you can do becomes available, this menu will populate with different stuff you can do. So right now the options are to parent, join, or separate. So even though this object we made has a lot of like loose parts to it, it's still this single object here. If we wanted to separate them, we could just press separate. And now if I were to like grab an individual part, we can see we can move all these, which is pretty sweet. I could press Control Z to undo all those moving things, and I could press A to select all and join them all back together again. But say for instance, I were to double right click here and under curve, add a path, and press tab to go into edit mode, and then select one of these vertex points and press E to extrude, and just made some kind of crazy path here. And notice this menu has changed. So the ability to separate is not here because this is not an object that you can separate things. However, if I were to select this object and then shift to select the path, notice a new option becomes available to follow. So if we wanted this object to follow this path we just made, we just press follow, and now it will be able to follow. So if we press play under the animation here, watch this object we created perfectly follow this path. So we could press back to go to the end. And notice even after that, there's now a new option, which if we wanted to, we can reverse the direction this thing is going. And you can see these animation keys were automatically generated for this when we created that. A cool feature about this is if you've been working on an animation and it's like, I don't know, it's like 11.5 seconds long, whenever you press that follow button, it will generate an animation to the exact length of whatever you already have going on in the scene, which is pretty sweet. So we can start combining some stuff we've already learned here. And this is really the core advantage of Sensei Format. It makes combining things so much easier to build like large scale projects. So if I were to like select this awesome sphere thing we made, I could come down here and have the camera track this. So just track selected. Now if we press play, these are some convenience tools here in the director's chair. We can see the camera is following our object on our path here, which is really cool. So I'm going to press Shift C to recenter my cursor, and then press Shift A, which you can also press if you're used to that instead of double right clicking, and add a plane. Then I'm going to press S to scale it and tap W a bunch of times to smooth it out. So we've got a little bit of a background reference of watching this thing go. And maybe we should lift the curve up some so that the sphere isn't going into the ground there. And press play again. And I'll back this camera out so we can see a little bit of the ground. There we see that thing moving around, pretty cool. So you probably noticed this file browser thing here. And what this is part of the Sensei Format assets library. And so this works in conjunction with this little button here, which allows you to make a big view of whatever folder you're in. So if we press this, this will expand these folders here. And we'll also see some new buttons here to link and append. Now in another video specifically covering the assets library, we talk about, setting all this stuff up. When you first install Sensei Format, this will just be a generic location. So there's nothing really that useful where all these folders are, just like random computer junk. But if you press your tilde key, that's a little squiggly key above the tab key on the keyboard, you can expand this. We can click this little plus sign to expand this menu. Wherever you see these little plus tabs, that means another menu is hiding. I could navigate to where I keep all my Blender stuff. And we talk about, making a library folder on your computer to keep models, projects, textures, what have you. And normally I would recommend doing this with a fresh startup file of Blender, so you could save this in your startup file like we did with the optimize render option. But for now, I'm just gonna, do it like this. So this is what this area normally looks like for me. So if I wanted to, bring some other file or object I had made in another file into this scene, all I would do is like click on the models folder where I have some stuff, and here's some different Blender files. So say I wanted to bring in this fork and knife set, I just click it, and then I would right click wherever I want this to be brought to in the scene. So I don't know, maybe up here. So we have that selected, then we just press append, and these items are instantly brought into our scene. So this is an extremely useful feature. And when we're done, we can just close the library right up there. Okay, so what I would like to happen is for this fork and spoon and knife set to fall to the ground, like from way up high. And to do that, we can use some physics control. Now the Sensei Format physics control menu is similar to the physics tab in default Blender. While a lot of the options are similar, a bit more code cleanup goes into making sure that the results you're expecting to happen actually happen. That's a big part of the philosophy of Sensei Format, is delivering expected results to help reduce frustration and just to remove all those wrenches that get thrown into the cogs of your project as you're going along. So what we could do is select these objects here, and to give physics to them, to make it where like gravity will affect them and stuff, we just select them, press add active. And right now, if we were to press play, we also have a convenience little play control, very similar to how we have one down here in the director's chair. If we were to press play, they'll fall straight through this floor, which is not great. So what I'm going to do is select the floor and click add passive, and that will add collision physics to whatever object I added it to. However, it will keep it locked in 3D space, whereas when we press add active on these guys, this will give collision physics to these guys, but also gravity. So if we go back and press play here, we'll see those things just like fall straight to the ground here, which is pretty cool. However, when they fell, they went through our little sphere thing. So we don't want that. So we want to give this thing physics too. So with it selected, we want to press add active. And so now when we press play, when those things fall, well, only the fork hit it. So as you can see when we play there, if we slowly scroll through this, I'll hold right click, you can see the fork actually hits that there. Yeah. Maybe we'll press B to do a box select and bring this over and bring these down. Maybe also 3 to go into left view, and R to rotate, control to constrain. And have them so they fall like this. Let's try that out. Okay, that's a little more interesting. So I'm going to close up this physics control for now. And I want to take a second to talk about animating in general with Sensei Format. As you'll notice here, what's called the dope sheet, that is the area where our keyframes are to stuff, is combined with the actual animation controls. And this makes life just a lot easier. Sensei Format also has another really great hotkey convention when it comes to adding keyframes. For instance, if we were to go all the way to the back of here, and I were to double right click here and say add a monkey head, press W a few times to give it some smoothing. Say I wanted to animate this monkey head. I could press I on my keyboard to insert a keyframe for it. And as you can see, the monkey's head is called Suzanne and a keyframe's entered. And that's what I do if I want to enter a keyframe on that exact frame. But there's another really sweet tool where if you instead of I, you press F, this will insert a keyframe and move the timeline down 1 second. So this makes it really easy to prototype out a basic animation for something. So I could make a change, press F, the timeline gets moved down. I can move this guy over here, rotate it, scale it, press F again. And each time I press F, I don't have to deal with the timeline or keyframes. I can just, very quickly prototype out an animation for something and then worry about tweaking it later. Okay, so now if we go back, press play, you can see this monkey head animating to all the part areas where we animated it. Another really awesome feature about the animation tools in Sensei Format is keyframe and timeline snapping. Now there is keyframe and timeline snapping available in Blender default without Sensei Format, but it doesn't really work in the way that you want it to. So for instance, if I were to shift select these frames and press S to scale them, they scale in towards the location of my timeline indicator here. But if I press G to grab to pick them up, they will snap to the cursor, which is awesome. The cursor also automatically snaps to increments of seconds or half seconds. You can set this all up by clicking this button here and adjust the snap increment, or you can turn off keyframe snapping. So I could say disable timeline snap. That's this little cursor thing. So say I drag this to here, to frame 96, which we can see there, both in the 3D view and down there, or frame 97. And now if I press G to grab and I let this go near here, it will snap exactly to the cursor, whichever frame was closest to it. And this is not really functionality that's available in Blender default. This was special tools I had to build to ensure that this, delivered, once again, expected results. And likewise, there are reverse and mirror tools, but they don't really work how you would expect them to. Not how I expect them to, anyway. So for instance, if we bring these keyframes back to the beginning where we animated this monkey head, and then we press play. We can see the beginning and end of this animation of the monkey head. So if we wanted to reverse this, whatever frames we had selected here in our dope sheet, we just press reverse, and they'll reverse perfectly so that the animation will go exactly in the opposite order. Also have these mirror button, which will, regardless of where the timeline is or, however things are set up, if you press mirror, it will perfectly mirror your selection from beginning to end. So watch this monkey head go to its end and then zoop, falls back and does an exact mirror animation. Okay, so quickly before we go, I'm going to switch this back to cycles so I can show you some more sweet stuff about this director's chair area. If we wanted to use some depth of field effects, we could focus in on this sphere thing that we're already tracking. If we press camera, we can click focus selected, and notice when we do that, oh wait, I had the monkey head selected, whoops. Let me click on the actual thing we want to track, which is this awesome sphere thing, and click focus selected again. Okay, so notice now that we do that if I spin around here to where we can see something in the background, that this is in focus and that is in blur. In Sensei Format, this happens both live in the 3D view and when you do a render preview and when you render. So all of these values are controlled simultaneously, whereas in default Blender, at the time of this video anyway, you would have to set up field of view effects in the live view and then set them up separately at render time. But this works for both cycles and Blender renders. We can adjust this focus value, make it much higher or lower. And I'm going to stop tracking for a moment so I can, zoom away from here. Maybe bring this animation back some. So if I were to bring that focus down even more, we can see it getting blurry. Bring it up, it gets less blurry. And also if we press render preview, we can see stuff definitely blurred out in the back. And so we know that this is what it's going to look like when it renders out. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this thing and click the material tab and press new, and under surface, change this to glossy and maybe a tiny bit of roughness. And under lights, turn on quick lights, the same option we have available when painting. And so we can get a view of this thing a little bit better as a shiny, weird ball thing that we made. And maybe we'll do something similar for these guys. Select this spoon, press new, and make this a glossy one too. But maybe we'll make it like a yellowy color, increase the roughness a little bit, and we'll go ahead and call this gold. And then we'll shift select these other two silverware, and I'm going to press Q. And under material options, I can click assign material and give this material to whatever objects I have selected. We'll use that gold there. Now we can press render preview. And so, yeah, looks pretty sweet. So yeah, there are several options like depth of field effects and tracking and lighting and stuff like that all work in the 3D view as well as at render time. So this makes it a lot easier to quickly visualize things. Also, this makes it a lot easier to do test renders. So if I wanted to test render the scene out like this, all I do is press my render button. And as you can see, I've got the sample set super low here. If you'll notice this value here, this is actually the slider which allows you to make larger or smaller renders. And this is 55% of the actual render output value, which currently, if we click on the render tab and dimensions, it's 1920 by 1080. And you can see that same slider right there. And this is really helpful when you need to render out a lot of small tests. Another really helpful feature in Sensei Format for rendering is, notice how we're on slot 1 right now. And without adjusting anything, if we just click render again, notice how this slot automatically changed for us. So without thinking about it, we can always be able to go back and compare and contrast our different renders. So for instance, say I wanted to see a better render of this at a much higher value, so I can increase the render quality to say 250, which still is not that great. But because it's higher, I know it's going to take longer, so I want to make this a little bit smaller. And this is especially useful when you're testing animation, which can take a really long time. So we can press render. And now I've got a much higher quality render, but it's much smaller, so it took about the same time to render, which maybe maybe that was too small, but you get the basic idea. Another really helpful feature in Sensei Format, if you're more or less just using Blender as a device to create graphics, is the ability to instantly block out the background. So if we, under output options here, turn on use transparent, we can render a scene like this. And then you could immediately save this out and as like a PNG or something. And you have graphics you can use if you plan on using it in Photoshop or something somewhere else. I probably should have hid the ground, which we can do by clicking this to hide it in the 3D view and this to hide it from rendering. And I mean, I don't know why you would use whatever this is as a graphic, but just, I don't know, say you wanted to, that option is available for you. So it makes it easy because you can just come up here under output options, turn on use transparent at any time. And you're like, okay, got it, got my graphic I wanted to make for whatever project, and then just click save image, make sure it's set to PNG or something that can display transparent backgrounds like that, and just click on your desktop and save it as my graphic or something. Click save as image, and now when we go over to our desktop, you can see that transparent PNG image little thumbnail of the thing. It just makes common tasks for artists and graphic designers and stuff easier to do and just get straight to it when you need to use Blender in a practical way. So I'll press go back here, which takes us back to our 3D view. So we've made a silly little animation here. We might as well render the thing out. So this thing goes to the last frame here is, see, this is why I like my timeline snapping on, because it would just, if I let go here, would automatically snap to that keyframe, and then I would know. So I'm going to turn off disable timeline snap, and it snaps there. So last frame is at 168. So we would want to set up the end of our animation to be 168 frames long. And since this is a test render, we would want to make it real small, so it's like, not taking forever to render it out. And maybe drop the quality to 75 because it's just a little test. And I'll go ahead and turn off use transparent so it will render out the black background. However, you could leave that on and save your animation as a series of transparent PNG sequences to do more advanced editing in other software if you want, or indeed in Blender. And to render this out as an animation, well, actually, I do want this camera following something. I guess it should be following this thing again. So we'll select it, press camera, track selected. Let's press back and then decide where we want the camera positioned as it's following this thing. And just to make this more interesting. That looks pretty cool. Okay, so now we got everything planned out. To do our actual animation, we'll just click this, then render animation. Okay, so our little animation has finished. To watch it, we'll just click here and play animation. And then we get our little animator. And yeah, so super low quality. Obviously, a lot of things we need to adjust if we were serious about whatever this is. Who knows what this is? The point is, it's an animation, and it's just a lot easier to actually make things with Sensei Format. So I haven't begun to scratch the surface with all the things that Sensei Format can help you do and all the different tools and disciplines it can help you combine to actually make things, which is super exciting. You can learn more, of course, by checking out the Sensei Format manual. Just click on this view manual link from there in the file menu once you have Sensei Format installed. I actually recommend downloading the actual PDF as well as the hotkeys PDF, but you can learn a bit more about the features of Sensei Format in the manual, But ultimately, you're just going to need to watch the videos in the crash course to learn about everything. This is just sort of a brief overview. This page of the manual is particularly useful when starting out. It's a list of hotkeys, both Blender default hotkeys and Sensei Format hotkeys that you're going to be using most often. So I recommend keeping a copy of this by your side as you're learning. So I hope you're excited to get started with the crash course. I can't wait to see all the crazy, amazing things that I know are living inside of your brain and dying to bust out into reality. And that's really the purpose of Sensei Format and the crash course. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next tutorial.